Behind the golden gates of Windsor Palace, where centuries of tradition guard the crown's most precious secrets, a discovery would send shockwaves through the royal household and threaten to expose a web of deception that reached the very heart of the monarchy. When Margaret Whitmore, a trusted lady-in-waiting with 40 years of faithful service, noticed the empty velvet case where the Queen Mother's legendary sapphire pure should have rested, she had no idea that a simple act of reporting the missing jewelry would unleash a scandal that would test loyalties, destroy reputations, and force the royal family to confront a betrayal from within their own trusted circle. The missing pieces weren't just any jewelry. They were the crown's most treasured collection, worth millions and steeped in royal history dating back 3 centuries. But as palace security cameras revealed impossible truths and long-buried secrets surfaced, it became clear that this wasn't simply a case of theft. Someone with intimate access to the royal quarters had orchestrated the perfect crime, and the royal guard's intervention would reveal a conspiracy that threatened to shake the very foundations of the British monarchy. What began as a routine inventory check would evolve into the most significant security breach in modern royal history, forcing palace officials to question everything they thought they knew about trust, loyalty, and the price of power within the world's most watched family. Margaret Whitmore had always prided herself on being invisible. In 40 years of service to the royal household, she had perfected the art of moving through the palace corridors like a whisper, attending to her duties with the kind of quiet efficiency that made her indispensable yet unnoticed. On the morning of October 15th, as autumn rain drummed against the tall windows of Windsor Palace, Margaret began her routine inspection of the Queen Mother's private chambers with the same methodical precision that had defined her entire career. The Queen Mother's quarters remained exactly as they had been during her lifetime, preserved as a shrine to royal tradition and maternal devotion. Every morning, Margaret would dust the antique furniture, arrange fresh flowers from the palace gardens, and ensure that everything remained in perfect order. It was a sacred duty that she performed with religious devotion, understanding that these rooms represented not just personal space, but living history. The jewelry vault was Margaret's final stop each morning, a small but heavily secured chamber, connected to the Queen Mother's dressing room by a hidden door concealed behind an 18th century tapestry. The combination to the vault had been changed only 3 times in the past decade, and only 5 people in the entire palace knew the current sequence. Margaret had been entrusted with this knowledge as part of her elevated position, a responsibility that she carried with the weight of centuries of royal protocol. As she turned the heavy brass dial, listening for the familiar clicks that would grant her access, Margaret felt the same sense of privilege that had sustained her through decades of service. The vault door swung open, with its characteristic whisper of well-oiled hinges, revealing the carefully organized collection that represented generations of royal inheritance. Tiara cases lined the walls, their contents glittering even in the subdued lighting, while necklaces, bracelets, and brooches rested in individual velvet-lined compartments. But something was wrong. Margaret's trained eye immediately noticed the gap where the sapphire palace should have been displayed. The collection, consisting of a magnificent necklace, matching earrings, a bracelet, and an intricate brooch, had been the Queen Mother's most treasured possession. The deep blue stones, each one perfectly cut and set in platinum, had been a wedding gift from King George VI and held both enormous monetary value and irreplaceable sentimental significance. Margaret's hands trembled as she double-checked the inventory list, hoping against hope that perhaps the pieces had been moved for cleaning or appraisal. But the documentation was clear. The sapphire parure should have been in its designated location, and there was no record of any authorized removal. Her heart raced as she examined the empty case more closely, noting that there were no signs of forced entry and no damage to the surrounding security systems. The implications hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a random theft by an outside intruder. Someone with legitimate access to the vault had taken the jewelry, someone who knew the combination and understood the security protocols well enough to remove the pieces without triggering any alarms. Margaret realized that she was looking at evidence of the most serious security breach in modern royal history, perpetrated by someone within the palace's trusted inner circle. After ensuring that nothing else appeared to be missing, Margaret carefully locked the vault and made her way to the office of Sir David Worthington, the palace's chief security coordinator. Her legs felt unsteady as she walked through the familiar corridors, past portraits of long-dead monarchs who seemed to watch her with knowing eyes. The weight of what she had discovered pressed down on her shoulders, and she understood that her simple morning routine had just uncovered a scandal that could rock the monarchy to its foundations. Sir David was a former military officer whose 20 years of palace service had earned him a reputation for discretion and unflappable competence. When Margaret knocked on his office door, She found him reviewing security reports from the previous evening, his silver hair perfectly combed, and his uniform immaculate despite the early hour. The expression on Margaret's face immediately told him that something was seriously wrong. Margaret's voice shook as she explained her discovery, watching as Sir David's composed demeanor gradually gave way to barely controlled alarm. He questioned her thoroughly about every detail of her morning routine, confirming that she had followed all proper protocols and that there could be no mistake about the missing jewelry. When he was satisfied that Margaret's account was accurate and complete, Sir David immediately activated the palace's highest-level security response. Within minutes, the Queen Mother's chambers were sealed and declared off-limits to all personnel except essential security staff. Sir David personally accompanied Margaret back to the jewelry vault, where he conducted his own thorough examination of the scene. His trained eye confirmed what Margaret had already discovered. This was an inside job, executed by someone with intimate knowledge of palace procedures and access to the most sensitive areas of the royal residence. The security footage from the previous 48 hours was immediately secured and prepared for detailed analysis. Sir David knew that the palace's comprehensive surveillance system would hold the key to understanding exactly when and how the theft had occurred. But he also understood that reviewing those recordings would inevitably reveal the identity of someone who had violated the most sacred trust in the British monarchy, and the consequences of that revelation would extend far beyond the missing jewelry itself. As word of the security breach began to spread through the palace's senior staff, an atmosphere of tension and suspicion settled over the entire residence. Longtime servants found themselves questioning colleagues they had worked alongside for decades, while administrators began the delicate process of determining who would need to be informed about the theft and in what order. The missing sapphire puree represented more than just valuable jewelry. It symbolized the violation of trust that formed the bedrock of royal service. Sir David's first call was to the private secretary of the reigning monarch, who would need to decide how and when to inform the royal family about the theft. The conversation was brief and conducted in the kind of coded language that palace staff used when discussing sensitive matters over potentially monitored phone lines. But the message was clear. The monarchy faced a crisis that threatened to expose vulnerabilities in its most basic security protocols and raise uncomfortable questions about loyalty within its own household. The investigation officially began within hours of Margaret's discovery, with Sir David assembling a small team of the palace's most trusted security personnel. The group included Detective Inspector James Morrison, a Scotland Yard officer who had been seconded to palace duty for his expertise in high-stakes theft cases, and Sarah Chen, a digital forensics expert whose discretion had been tested through previous sensitive investigations involving the royal family. As the team gathered in Sir David's office, the magnitude of their task became clear. They needed to identify and apprehend the thief while maintaining absolute secrecy about the investigation. Any leak to the media would create a public relations disaster for the monarchy, while the wrong kind of internal speculation could destroy the morale and trust that kept the palace functioning. The investigators understood that they were not just solving a theft case, they were protecting the reputation and stability of an institution that had endured for over 1,000 years. Detective Inspector Morrison took charge of the forensic analysis, beginning with a detailed examination of the jewelry vault and the Queen Mother's quarters. Despite the lack of obvious physical evidence, his experienced eye noticed subtle indicators that confirmed the inside nature of the theft. The person responsible had known exactly where to look and had possessed the skills necessary to remove the jewelry without leaving obvious traces. Sarah Chen began her analysis of the digital evidence, focusing particularly on the access logs for the Queen Mother's quarters and the security camera footage from the relevant time period. The palace's surveillance system was more comprehensive than most people realized, with cameras positioned to monitor not just public areas, but also staff corridors and service entrances that would have provided access to the jewelry vault. As the first day of investigation progressed, a disturbing pattern began to emerge from the evidence. The theft had been planned with sophisticated knowledge of palace routines and security procedures. The perpetrator had chosen a time when regular security patrols would be focused elsewhere, and had known exactly how to navigate the building's complex layout without triggering any automated alerts. This level of inside knowledge pointed to someone with years of palace experience and access to highly classified information about security protocols. The team's preliminary findings suggested that they were dealing with someone who had not only betrayed the trust placed in them, but had done so with careful premeditation. The missing sapphire bureau represented just the beginning of what promised to be a complex and politically sensitive investigation that would test the loyalty and discretion of everyone involved in uncovering the truth. Sarah Chen's fingers moved across her keyboard with practiced efficiency as she began the painstaking process of analyzing the palace security footage. The investigation room had been transformed into a high-tech command center, with multiple monitors displaying different camera angles and timestamps from the critical 48-hour period. Detective Inspector Morrison stood behind her, watching as she isolated and enhanced various segments of video that might contain evidence of the theft. The palace's surveillance system was more sophisticated than most people realized, consisting of over 200 cameras positioned throughout the buildings and grounds. However, the system had been designed with privacy considerations in mind, particularly regarding the royal family's personal quarters. This meant that while the public areas and staff corridors were comprehensively monitored, certain private spaces remained under limited surveillance to protect the monarchy's dignity and personal privacy. Sarah's initial focus was on the main corridor leading to the Queen Mother's quarters, a passage that served as the primary access route for authorized personnel. The footage showed the normal flow of palace staff going about their daily duties, each person clearly identifiable by their uniforms and movements. Margaret Whitmore appeared several times, following her regular schedule with the punctuality that had characterized her entire career. Other familiar faces included housekeeping staff, security guards, and maintenance personnel, all following their established routines. But as Sarah advanced through the timeline, she noticed something unusual. On the evening of October 13th, approximately 36 hours before Margaret's discovery, the camera covering the main corridor had experienced a brief malfunction. For exactly 17 minutes, the feed showed nothing but static, a technical failure that had somehow escaped the attention of the monitoring staff, who should have immediately investigated any interruption in the surveillance system. Detective Inspector Morrison's expression darkened as he processed the implications of this discovery. Technical malfunctions in the palace security system were extremely rare, and when they did occur, they triggered immediate response protocols that required multiple levels of verification and repair. The fact that this particular malfunction had gone unnoticed suggested either incompetence on the part of the monitoring staff or something more sinister. Sarah pulled up the maintenance logs for the security system, cross-referencing them with personnel schedules and access records. What she found sent a chill through the investigation team. According to the official records, no maintenance work had been scheduled for that time period, and no malfunction had been reported or addressed. The 17-minute blackout appeared to have been deliberately created and then covered up, representing a level of technical sophistication that pointed to someone with intimate knowledge of the palace's security infrastructure. Sir David joined the review session as Sarah continued her analysis, bringing with him additional intelligence that had emerged from interviews with palace staff. Several servants had mentioned seeing unfamiliar personnel in the building during recent weeks, individuals who claimed to be conducting routine maintenance or security assessments. While such activities were not uncommon in a complex facility like the palace, the timing of these sightings now seemed suspicious given the theft. The investigation took on new urgency as the team realized they might be dealing with a more complex conspiracy than initially suspected. The theft of the sapphire bureau could have been the work of an insider working alone, but the sophisticated manipulation of the security system suggested the involvement of multiple individuals with specialized skills. This possibility raised the stakes considerably, as it implied a coordinated effort to penetrate the palace's defenses rather than a simple case of individual betrayal. Detective Inspector Morrison initiated a comprehensive background review of all personnel who had accessed the Queen Mother's quarters during the previous month. The list included not only regular staff members like Margaret, but also specialists who had been called in for various maintenance and inspection duties. Each name would need to be thoroughly investigated, their financial situations examined, and their recent activities scrutinized for any signs of suspicious behavior. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen expanded her analysis to include the palace's communication systems, searching for any unusual electronic activity that might have coincided with the security system malfunction. Modern thefts often involve sophisticated coordination between inside accomplices and external handlers, using everything from encrypted messaging apps to hidden surveillance equipment to facilitate their operations. The breakthrough came when Sarah discovered an anomaly in the palace's wireless network traffic. During the same time period as the camera malfunction, there had been a significant spike in data transmission from a location within the building. The signal had been routed through multiple servers and encrypted using commercial-grade security software, making it nearly impossible to trace its ultimate destination. However, the technical sophistication of this communication suggested professional criminal involvement rather than an opportunistic theft by a disgruntled employee. Sir David immediately contacted Scotland Yard's Cybercrime Division, requesting additional technical support for what was clearly evolving into a complex investigation with international implications. The theft of royal jewels was serious enough, but the evidence of electronic surveillance and communication suggested that the palace had been targeted by a sophisticated criminal organization with the resources and expertise to penetrate supposedly impregnable security systems. As the second day of investigation progressed, the team began developing a clearer picture of how the theft had been executed. The perpetrators had conducted extensive reconnaissance of the palace's security protocols, identifying vulnerabilities in both the physical and electronic systems. They had then exploited these weaknesses during a carefully planned operation that minimized their exposure while maximizing their chances of success. The involvement of palace insiders now seemed certain, but the identity of these accomplices remained elusive. The background checks on staff members were proceeding methodically, but everyone on the access list had seemingly solid credentials and clean records. This suggested either that the inside accomplices were highly skilled at maintaining their cover, or that the recruitment had been based on factors other than obvious criminal history. Detective Inspector Morrison's experience with high-profile theft cases told him that they were likely dealing with what law enforcement called a long con, a sophisticated operation that had been planned and developed over an extended period. The criminals had invested significant time and resources in penetrating the palace's defenses, which meant that the Sapphire Bureau was probably just the beginning of their intended theft spree rather than their ultimate objective. This possibility led the investigation team to conduct a comprehensive inventory of all valuable items in the palace's various storage facilities. If the thieves had gained access to the Queen Mother's jewelry vault, they might have also compromised other secure areas containing priceless artifacts, documents, or treasures. The process of checking every secure location in the palace would take weeks, but it was essential to understand the full scope of the security breach. Sarah's continued analysis of the electronic evidence revealed additional concerning details. The sophisticated communication system used by the thieves had been active for at least 6 weeks before the theft, suggesting a lengthy preparation period during which the criminals had been gathering intelligence and coordinating their operation. The frequency and timing of these communications indicated multiple individuals working together, each with specific roles and responsibilities in the overall plan. The investigation team also discovered that the thieves had demonstrated remarkable knowledge of the palace's staff schedules and security rotations. This level of inside information could only have been obtained through direct observation over an extended period, or through access to confidential scheduling documents. Either possibility pointed to the involvement of palace personnel at a level that went beyond simple cooperation with outside criminals. As the evidence mounted, Sir David faced the delicate task of informing the royal family about the investigation's preliminary findings. The theft of the Queen Mother's jewelry was serious enough, but the discovery of a sophisticated criminal conspiracy with inside accomplices raised security concerns that extended far beyond the missing sapphire pure. The palace's vulnerability to this type of attack threatened the safety and privacy of the royal family in ways that had not been seriously considered since the security reforms implemented after previous incidents. The decision was made to brief the monarch's private secretary on the investigation's progress, with the understanding that this information would be carefully shared with the royal family as appropriate. The briefing would need to balance the need for transparency about security risks with the importance of maintaining operational secrecy around the ongoing investigation. Any premature disclosure could compromise the team's ability to identify and apprehend the criminals while potentially exposing additional security vulnerabilities. Detective Inspector Morrison prepared a preliminary report summarizing the evidence gathered during the first 48 hours of investigation. The document painted a picture of a sophisticated criminal operation that had successfully penetrated one of the world's most secure facilities. Through a combination of inside knowledge, technical expertise, and careful planning. The theft of the Sapphire Pura represented not just a significant financial loss, but a serious breach of the trust and security that formed the foundation of royal life. The report's conclusions were sobering. The palace faced a criminal conspiracy that had demonstrated the ability to manipulate security systems, recruit inside accomplices, and execute complex theft operations without detection. The investigation would need to identify not only the stolen jewelry, but also the full extent of the security vulnerabilities that had been exploited, and the complete network of individuals involved in the conspiracy. As the team prepared for the challenging work ahead, they understood that they were not just investigating a theft, but protecting an institution that represented centuries of British history and tradition. The stakes could not have been higher, and the pressure to succeed was immense. The missing sapphire purole had become the symbol of a much larger threat to the security and stability of the monarchy itself. The revelation that shattered the investigation came on the third day, when Detective Inspector Morrison's painstaking review of personnel files uncovered a connection that no one had expected to find. Hidden within the employment history of James Thornfield, a maintenance supervisor who had worked at the palace for 15 years, was a financial trail that led directly to a known criminal organization specializing in high-value thefts across Europe. Thornfield had always been considered a model employee, quiet and efficient in his duties, with an impeccable record of service that had earned him increasing levels of trust and access within the palace. His background check from 15 years earlier had revealed nothing suspicious, and his subsequent performance had been so consistently reliable that he had become nearly invisible to security oversight. This perfect cover had allowed him to study the palace's security systems intimately while maintaining the complete trust of his supervisors. The financial investigation revealed that Thornfield had been receiving irregular payments from a Swiss bank account connected to Markus Volkov, a Russian businessman with suspected ties to international art and jewelry theft rings. These payments, disguised as investment returns and inheritance distributions, had allowed Thornfield to maintain his modest lifestyle while slowly accumulating enough money to support a comfortable retirement that would have been impossible on his palace salary alone. But Thornfield's role appeared to be more complex than simple inside collaboration. Sarah Chen's analysis of his work schedules and access patterns showed that he had been systematically documenting the palace's security infrastructure for years, creating detailed maps of camera positions, alarm systems, and guard rotations. This intelligence had been transmitted to external handlers using the sophisticated communication system that Sarah had discovered, turning Thornfield into a long-term intelligence asset rather than just an opportunistic accomplice. The scope of the conspiracy began to reveal itself as the investigation team traced Thornfield's activities through the digital forensics. He had used his maintenance access to install listening devices in strategic locations throughout the palace, allowing the criminal organization to monitor conversations and gather intelligence about royal schedules and security protocols. The theft of the Sapphire Peru was just the culmination of a multi-year operation that had turned the palace into an open book for international criminals. Sir David authorized immediate surveillance of Thornfield while the investigation team worked to understand the full extent of the security compromise. The decision was made to allow Thornfield to continue his normal duties while being carefully monitored, in the hope that he would lead investigators to his criminal associates or reveal additional aspects of the ongoing operation. This approach required extraordinary coordination between palace security and Scotland Yard specialists, who worked together to maintain the appearance of normal operations while gathering evidence of the conspiracy. The surveillance revealed that Thornfield was scheduled to meet with an unknown contact the following evening at a location outside London. This meeting represented the investigation team's best opportunity to identify the external members of the criminal organization and potentially recover the stolen jewelry. Detective Inspector Morrison coordinated with specialized surveillance units to ensure that the meeting could be observed without compromising the investigation or alerting the criminals to police interest. Meanwhile, Sarah Chan's continued analysis of the electronic evidence revealed the existence of additional inside accomplices within the palace staff. The communication patterns showed multiple sources of information being transmitted to the external handlers, suggesting that Thornfield had recruited or compromised other employees to expand the criminal organization's intelligence-gathering capabilities. The identification of these additional accomplices became a critical priority for the investigation team. The psychological pressure on the investigation team intensified as they realized the extent to which the palace's security had been compromised. Every conversation, every security briefing, and every royal movement had potentially been monitored and reported to criminal organizations for years. The implications for royal safety and privacy were staggering, and the team understood that their investigation had uncovered a security failure of historic proportions. Margaret Whitmore, whose discovery had initiated the investigation, found herself struggling with the knowledge that her trusted workplace had been infiltrated so thoroughly. The realization that colleagues she had worked alongside for years might have been secretly betraying the royal family created an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia that affected every aspect of palace life. Staff members began watching each other carefully, wondering who could be trusted and who might be reporting their activities to criminal handlers. The investigation team implemented additional security measures to protect the integrity of their ongoing work, using secure communication protocols and limiting information sharing to only the most essential personnel. The discovery of listening devices throughout the palace meant that traditional security briefings and strategy sessions had to be conducted in specially secured locations outside the building to prevent the criminals from learning about the investigation's progress. Detective Inspector Morrison's surveillance of Thornfield's scheduled meeting required careful coordination with international law enforcement agencies, as the criminal organization appeared to have connections across multiple countries. The meeting location, a seemingly innocent cafe in central London, was placed under discreet observation by specialized surveillance teams who used advanced equipment to monitor conversations and identify participants without revealing their presence. The meeting itself proved to be a revelation that exceeded the investigation team's expectations. Thornfield met with Elena Volkov, the daughter of the suspected criminal mastermind Marcus Volkov, who had apparently been assigned to handle the operational details of the palace infiltration. Elena's presence in London indicated that the criminal organization considered the palace operation to be of significant strategic importance, worthy of direct family involvement in its management. The surveillance team captured evidence of Elena providing Thornfield with detailed instructions for additional thefts, including specific items from the royal collection that the organization intended to steal in the coming weeks. This intelligence allowed the investigation team to understand that the sapphire puree theft was indeed just the beginning of a much more ambitious criminal enterprise targeting the most valuable treasures in the royal collection. The conversation between Thornfield and Elena also revealed the existence of a sophisticated international network for disposing of stolen royal artifacts, with buyers already arranged for items that had not yet been stolen. This level of criminal organization suggested connections to wealthy private collectors who were willing to purchase recognizably royal items, despite their obvious illegal provenance. Sarah Chen's real-time monitoring of the meeting provided additional crucial intelligence about the criminal organization's communication methods and security protocols. Elena used encrypted messaging devices and spoke in coded language that indicated extensive training in operational security. The sophistication of their methods confirmed that the investigation team was dealing with professional criminals rather than opportunistic thieves. The evidence gathered during the surveillance operation provided the investigation team with their first clear advantage in the case. They now knew the identity of key external conspirators, understood the scope of the criminal organization's plans, and possessed intelligence about future theft attempts that could be prevented or used to gather additional evidence. However, the decision about how to proceed required careful consideration of multiple competing priorities, so David faced the complex task of balancing immediate security concerns against the potential benefits of allowing the criminal operation to continue under careful surveillance. Arresting Thornfield and Elena immediately would prevent future thefts, but might compromise the investigation's ability to identify other accomplices and recover items that had already been stolen. The decision would ultimately determine whether the investigation focused on limiting immediate damage or exposing the complete extent of the criminal conspiracy. The briefing provided to the royal family's security advisors painted a sobering picture of the palace's vulnerability to sophisticated criminal infiltration. The report detailed how years of patient intelligence gathering had allowed criminals to understand and exploit weaknesses in security protocols that had been considered impenetrable. The recommendations for addressing these vulnerabilities would require fundamental changes to palace operations and security procedures that had been in place for decades. Detective Inspector Morrison's analysis of the criminal organization's methods revealed techniques that could potentially be used against other high-security facilities and high-profile targets. The intelligence gathered during the investigation would need to be shared with international law enforcement agencies to prevent similar operations against other institutions and wealthy private individuals who might be vulnerable to the same type of long-term infiltration and intelligence gathering. The psychological impact on palace staff became increasingly apparent as more details of the conspiracy emerged. The knowledge that their workplace had been under systematic criminal surveillance created an atmosphere of uncertainty and suspicion that threatened to undermine the trust and cooperation that were essential for palace operations. Sir David recognized that addressing these morale issues would be as important as resolving the security vulnerabilities that had been exploited by the criminals. As the investigation entered its most critical phase, the team prepared for the complex operational challenges of dismantling a sophisticated criminal network while protecting the evidence needed for successful prosecutions. The decisions made in the coming days would determine not only whether justice would be served for the theft of the Queen Mother's jewelry, but whether the palace could be secured against similar threats in the future. The missing sapphire Peru had become a symbol of much larger issues surrounding security, trust, and vulnerability at the highest levels of British society. The investigation's success would require not only skilled detective work and technical expertise, but also the kind of institutional courage needed to acknowledge and address fundamental flaws in systems that had been trusted for generations. The moment of truth arrived, when Captain William Hayes of the Royal Guard made a decision that would forever alter the course of the investigation. Having been briefed on the surveillance evidence and the scope of the criminal conspiracy, Captain Hayes concluded that the immediate safety of the royal family outweighed all other considerations. Against the advice of Detective Inspector Morrison, who wanted to continue surveillance to gather more evidence. Captain Hayes ordered the immediate arrest of James Thornfield and the implementation of emergency security protocols throughout the palace. The arrest took place on October 19, just as Thornfield was beginning his regular morning maintenance rounds. Captain Hayes personally led the intervention team, approaching Thornfield in the main service corridor with the quiet efficiency that had characterized Royal Guard operations for centuries. Thornfield's shocked reaction to seeing Captain Hayes and full armed guards in full-dress uniform confirmed the investigators' suspicions about his involvement in the conspiracy. Thornfield's immediate response was to demand legal representation and claim ignorance about any jewelry theft, but his nervous demeanor and obvious fear suggested that he understood the serious nature of the charges he would face. The search of his palace quarters, conducted simultaneously with his arrest, revealed hidden communication devices, detailed floor plans of secure areas, and encrypted data storage containing photographs of valuable royal artifacts that had not been reported as missing. The discovery of this additional evidence vindicated Captain Hayes' decision to act immediately rather than continue surveillance. Thornfield had been preparing for additional thefts that would have targeted items of even greater historical significance than the Queen Mother's sapphire parure. The photographs included detailed images of crown jewels, ceremonial swords, and ancient manuscripts that represented irreplaceable pieces of British heritage. Elena Volkov's reaction to Thornfield's arrest was swift and revealing. Sarah Chen's monitoring of the criminal organization's communication networks detected an immediate spike in encrypted message traffic, as Elena apparently coordinated an emergency response to the compromise of their palace operation. The panic evident in these communications confirmed that Thornfield's arrest had dealt a serious blow to the criminal conspiracy's plans and capabilities. However, Elena's response also revealed the sophisticated contingency planning that the criminal organization had implemented. Within hours of Thornfield's arrest, multiple bank accounts connected to the operation were emptied and closed, while safe houses across Europe were apparently evacuated. The speed and coordination of this response demonstrated the international scope of the criminal network and their extensive experience in managing law enforcement investigations.
The interrogation of James Thornfield proved to be a crucial turning point in the investigation.
Initially defiant and claiming innocence, Thornfield's resolve cracked when Detective Inspector Morrison presented him with evidence of his financial connections to the Volkov organization and recordings of his conversations with Elena. Faced with overwhelming proof of his involvement, Thornfield agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Thornfield's confession revealed the true scope of the criminal operation that had been targeting the royal family. The conspiracy had begun 5 years earlier when Marcus Volkov had identified the palace as a target-rich environment, containing artifacts and jewelry that could be sold to private collectors willing to pay premium prices for items with royal provenance. The operation had required extensive planning and substantial financial investment to establish the infrastructure needed for long-term intelligence gathering and theft operations. The recruitment of Thornfield had been carefully orchestrated through social engineering techniques that exploited his financial insecurities and personal grievances. The criminal organization had identified him as a potential asset through analysis of palace personnel records that had been obtained through previous security breaches. His gradual recruitment had taken over a year, during which he had been slowly compromised through a combination of financial incentives and psychological manipulation. Thornfield's detailed confession provided investigators with a comprehensive understanding of the criminal organization's methods and capabilities. He described the installation of surveillance equipment throughout the palace, the recruitment of additional inside accomplices, and the development of theft plans targeting dozens of valuable items from the royal collection. His cooperation allowed the investigation team to identify security vulnerabilities that had not been discovered through technical analysis alone. The revelation that shocked the investigation team most profoundly was Thornfield's confession about the scope of intelligence gathering that had been conducted over the previous 5 years. The criminal organization had compiled detailed profiles of royal family members, their personal preferences, daily routines, and security arrangements. This information had been gathered not just for theft purposes, but for potential use in more serious criminal activities, including kidnapping and extortion. Captain Hayes' decision to intervene when he did had apparently prevented the criminal organization from implementing plans that went far beyond simple theft. The intelligence gathered by Thornfield and his accomplices could have been used to threaten the personal safety of royal family members in ways that would have created international incidents and seriously compromised British national security. The Royal Guard's intervention had protected not just valuable artifacts, but the monarchy itself. The identification of additional inside accomplices proved to be more complex than initially expected. Thornfield's confession revealed that the criminal organization had used sophisticated psychological profiling to identify palace staff members who were vulnerable to recruitment. These potential accomplices had been approached gradually and carefully, with many of them unaware of the true nature of their involvement in the conspiracy. Sarah Chen's analysis of the communication evidence, combined with Thornfield's detailed confession, allowed the investigation team to piece together the complete structure of the criminal network. Elena Volkov had served as the operational commander, coordinating intelligence gathering and theft activities from a base in Switzerland. Her father Marcus provided strategic direction and financial resources while maintaining plausible deniability about specific criminal activities. The international scope of the criminal organization required coordination with law enforcement agencies across multiple countries to identify and apprehend the external conspirators. Captain Hayes worked closely with Scotland Yard and Interpol to develop arrest warrants and extradition requests for Elena Volkov and other members of the conspiracy who were operating outside British jurisdiction. The complexity of these international legal procedures meant that some criminals might escape prosecution despite clear evidence of their involvement. The recovery of the stolen sapphire Purole became a secondary priority, as the investigation team focused on preventing future security breaches and dismantling the complete criminal network. Thornfield's confession included information about the theft's immediate aftermath, revealing that the jewelry had been quickly moved through a sophisticated smuggling network designed to transport stolen artifacts to buyers in private collections around the world. The investigation team's efforts to trace the sapphire puree led them through a complex web of criminal connections spanning multiple countries and involving dozens of individuals with specialized roles in the theft and disposal operation. Each link in this criminal chain had been carefully compartmentalized to limit the damage that could be caused by the arrest or cooperation of any single individual. Captain Hayes' intervention had created a race against time, as the criminal organization worked to destroy evidence and eliminate connections that could lead to additional arrests. The investigation team had to move quickly to preserve evidence and identify criminal assets before they could be hidden or transferred beyond the reach of law enforcement agencies. The psychological impact on the royal family of learning about the extent to which their privacy and security had been compromised was profound and lasting. The knowledge that their most intimate daily routines had been monitored and analyzed by criminals created a sense of violation that went beyond the simple theft of valuable jewelry. The trust that had been fundamental to their relationship with palace staff had been shattered in ways that would require years to rebuild. Margaret Whitmore, whose discovery had initiated the investigation, found herself struggling with feelings of guilt and responsibility for not detecting the criminal conspiracy earlier. Despite reassurances from Sir David and the investigation team that no blame could be assigned to her, Margaret's confidence in her ability to protect the royal family's interests had been severely shaken by the revelation of how extensively the palace had been compromised. The broader implications of the criminal conspiracy extended beyond the immediate theft and security concerns to questions about the fundamental vulnerability of traditional institutions to modern criminal techniques. The palace's security protocols, which had been developed over centuries of experience with conventional threats, had proven inadequate against sophisticated criminal organizations using contemporary intelligence gathering and communication technologies. As the investigation moved into its final phases, Captain Hayes and his team faced the challenge of implementing security reforms that would prevent similar breaches in the future, while maintaining the accessibility and traditional character that were essential aspects of royal life. The balance between security and tradition would require careful consideration of competing priorities and extensive consultation with royal family members about acceptable changes to their daily routines and living arrangements. The missing Queen Mother's sapphire parure had become a symbol of much larger questions about security, privacy, and trust in modern society. The investigation's resolution would determine not only whether justice would be served for the specific crimes that had been committed, but whether traditional institutions could adapt successfully to contemporary security challenges while preserving their essential character and historical continuity. The final resolution of the case came 6 months later, in a series of coordinated international arrests that dismantled the Volkov criminal organization and recovered not only the Queen Mother's sapphire parure, but dozens of other stolen artifacts from wealthy targets across Europe. Elena Volkov was arrested in Geneva while attempting to board a private jet bound for Dubai, her luggage containing detailed plans for future operations against royal families and aristocratic houses throughout the continent. The recovery of the sapphire parure occurred in dramatic circumstances that vindicated every aspect of the investigation team's work. Acting on intelligence provided by James Thornfield's continued cooperation from prison, Swiss police raided a private storage facility in Zurich where they discovered a treasure trove of stolen artwork, jewelry, and historical artifacts representing decades of sophisticated theft operations. The Queen Mother's jewelry was found in a climate-controlled vault, carefully preserved and documented as part of the criminal organization's inventory of valuable assets. Detective Inspector Morrison personally accompanied the sapphire puree during its return journey to London, understanding the symbolic importance of the jewelry's recovery to both the investigation team and the royal family. The pieces had suffered no damage during their 6 months in criminal hands, a testament to the professional care with which the Volkov organization had managed their stolen inventory while seeking appropriate buyers in the international black market for royal artifacts. The return of the jewelry to Windsor Palace was conducted with the same discretion that had characterized the entire investigation. Margaret Whitmore was present when Detective Inspector Morrison personally placed the sapphire peria back in its proper location within the Queen Mother's jewelry vault, bringing full circle the chain of events that had begun with her careful attention to detail during routine morning duties. The moment represented not just the recovery of valuable property, but the restoration of trust and security to an institution that had been deeply wounded by the criminal conspiracy. Captain Hayes' decision to intervene when he did proved to have been absolutely correct, as subsequent investigation revealed that the Volkov organization had been preparing to implement plans that would have created international incidents and potentially endangered the lives of royal family members. The intelligence gathering conducted by Thornfield and his accomplices had provided the criminals with enough information to plan kidnapping attempts and extortion schemes that would have far exceeded the scope of simple theft operations. The prosecution of the criminal conspiracy required unprecedented coordination between law enforcement agencies across multiple jurisdictions, as the evidence trail led through Switzerland, France, Germany, and several Eastern European countries, where the Volkov organization had maintained operational bases. The complexity of the international legal proceedings meant that full justice for all aspects of the conspiracy took over 2 years to achieve. But the cooperation between agencies established new protocols for addressing sophisticated transnational criminal operations targeting high-profile institutions. James Thornfield received a reduced sentence in exchange for his comprehensive cooperation with investigators, but his 15 years of distinguished palace service could not protect him from the consequences of his betrayal. His testimony proved crucial in identifying additional security vulnerabilities and understanding the full scope of intelligence gathering that had been conducted within the palace. The knowledge that his cooperation had prevented more serious crimes provided some mitigation for his actions, but could not undo the fundamental breach of trust that his involvement represented. The identification and prosecution of additional inside accomplices revealed the sophisticated social engineering techniques that modern criminal organizations use to recruit assets within secure institutions. Several palace staff members who had unknowingly provided information to the conspiracy were cleared of criminal wrongdoing but required extensive counseling to understand how they had been manipulated by professional intelligence operatives. Their experiences became case studies for security awareness training implemented throughout the palace and other government facilities. Elena Volkov's trial in Switzerland became an international sensation, as prosecutors detailed the scope of the criminal organization's operations against wealthy targets across Europe. Her conviction and 20-year prison sentence sent a strong message to other criminal organizations considering similar operations, but law enforcement officials understood that the techniques pioneered by the Volkov conspiracy would likely be adopted and refined by future criminal enterprises targeting high-value institutions and individuals. The security reforms implemented at the palace following the investigation represented the most comprehensive overhaul of royal protection protocols since the modern security system had been established. Captain Hayes worked closely with international security experts to develop new procedures that balanced traditional royal accessibility with contemporary threat awareness, creating multiple layers of protection that could adapt to evolving criminal techniques while preserving the essential character of royal life. Sarah Chen's technical expertise proved invaluable in developing new electronic security protocols that could detect and prevent the kind of sophisticated surveillance equipment that had been installed by the Volkov organization. Her recommendations led to regular security sweeps using advanced detection equipment and the implementation of encrypted communication systems for sensitive palace operations. The lessons learned during the investigation became the foundation for security upgrades at other high-profile government facilities throughout the United Kingdom. The psychological impact on the royal family of learning about the extent of the criminal conspiracy required careful management by security advisors and family counselors, who specialized in helping high-profile individuals cope with privacy violations and security threats. The knowledge that their daily routines had been monitored and analyzed by criminals created lasting changes in how family members approached their public and private activities. With increased awareness of potential surveillance and greater appreciation for security protocols that had previously seemed unnecessary or intrusive. Margaret Whitmore's role in discovering the theft earned her recognition from both the royal family and law enforcement officials, but she struggled with the personal cost of learning how extensively her trusted workplace had been compromised. Her 40 years of faithful service had been based on absolute trust in the security and integrity of the palace environment, and the revelation of criminal infiltration forced her to confront uncomfortable questions about institutional vulnerability and personal responsibility that took years to resolve. The broader implications of the investigation extended far beyond the specific theft of the Queen Mother's jewelry to fundamental questions about institutional security in an era of sophisticated transnational crime. The techniques used by the Volkov organization highlighted vulnerabilities that existed in all large institutions that relied on trust-based security protocols rather than comprehensive technical monitoring and background verification systems. Sir David Worthington's leadership during the investigation earned him promotion to a senior position in the government's national security apparatus, where his experience with the palace conspiracy informed policy development for protecting critical institutions against similar threats. His understanding of how patient criminal intelligence gathering could compromise supposedly secure facilities led to new standards for personnel security and facility protection that were implemented across government and private sector organizations. The international law enforcement cooperation that developed during the investigation created new mechanisms for sharing intelligence about sophisticated criminal organizations that operate across national boundaries. The success in dismantling the Volkov conspiracy demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated international responses to transnational crime, leading to permanent institutional changes that improved the global capacity for addressing similar threats in the future. The recovery of the Sapphire period completed the practical aspects of the investigation, but the institutional changes prompted by the criminal conspiracy continued to evolve years after the case was officially closed. The palace's transformation from a trust-based security environment to a more technically sophisticated protection system represented a fundamental shift that reflected broader changes in how traditional institutions adapt to contemporary security challenges. The missing Queen Mother's jewelry had catalyzed a process of institutional self-examination and reform that strengthened not only the palace's security, but its capacity to fulfill its traditional functions in a changed world. The investigation's success demonstrated that even the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies could be defeated through professional law enforcement work, international cooperation, and institutional courage to acknowledge and address systemic vulnerabilities. Margaret Whitmore's careful attention to detail during routine morning duties had ultimately protected one of Britain's most treasured institutions from criminal exploitation that could have caused irreparable damage to the monarchy's security and reputation. Her discovery of the missing jewelry had begun a process that culminated in justice for the criminals, recovery of the stolen property, and fundamental improvements to the security systems that protect the royal family and the invaluable historical artifacts in their care. The sapphire Piora was eventually returned to its place of honor in the Queen Mother's collection, but its temporary absence had served as a catalyst for changes that would protect the monarchy for generations to come. The investigation had proven that traditional institutions could successfully adapt to contemporary threats while preserving their essential character and historical continuity, providing a model for other venerable establishments facing similar challenges in an increasingly complex security environment.